How is everybody in the cell camp?
Yeah,
Anything
really good.
you can talk about?
Yeah, so we've been weirdly we've been quieter this year than we would be in a normal year. Although what is a normal year anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so we're recording an album. We've put a lot of stuff up about that. We're doing the next bits kind of end of the year. So we're just sort of getting all of that together. We'll be talking to artists pretty soon, talking to labels, that kind of thing. So a lot of behind the scenes work. Yeah, we did a couple of shows. We did a sort of local show, and we did an away show in Wrexham, which was really good fun. Yeah, it's all good. It's all systems go. It's just a lot of kind of work that people don't really see at the moment. So it's an interesting time because I've recorded all of my bits. So my focus at the moment is sorting out all the book stuff. But obviously I'm also over like a part of everything that's happening behind the scenes.
Of course.
It's yeah. So yeah, it's really good fun and lots of things happening. Just nothing we can really show people just yet, which is kind of a bummer.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's always a bummer side, but it's still always fantastic to hear that things are going
Mm,
on because any quiet period makes you wonder, particularly in the UK scene. Well, you go
mm,
quiet for too long, you disappear. So the fact there's
yeah.
stuff going on, that's
Hmm.
good enough. That's stuff, that's reason to be positive.
Hmm. Definitely.
Of course, you touched upon it. The really interesting as Sales Future is, the interesting thing right now is that you're about to become a published author, which is obviously incredible, an incredible
Mm,
achievement. Congratulations on that.
thank you.
No problem. Tell us a little bit about this upcoming book. What is the basic basis?
Sure. So I actually have the author copy here, which I've just moved in with, in a really bright pink, the classic death metal pink. Um, yeah, so this is so 33 and a Third do short books about music, and they're expanding to do. Previously, it was individual books about individual albums, and this one they've expanded it to cover the history of subgenres, usually sort of niche genres that don't get explored as much.
Hmm.
And I had been pitching things to them, and they floated, "Do you want to come and do one of these? Have a go at doing one of these?" I said, "Yeah, definitely, I want to do that." And that was my big lockdown project. Um, so yeah, I've worked as a journalist for a while, for a bunch of different places. So that was kind of my instinct there was to I plot out the kind of story I want to tell, and then who do I want to talk to about it. So I spent a few months interviewing people. I spent a few weeks sort of like planning out everything. I started contacting bands and journalists and academics, and recording engineers and record labels um, owners. Really, like a lot of people who play a part in the making of death metal.
Yeah.
And then did the interviews, and then spent the next rest of the year putting the book together.
It's such an immensely huge subject matter. I mean, you say just death metal, and what that opens in your mind is incredible. Laying the groundwork for even getting started. How did you go about doing that? You talk about contacting people. Was that just the initial focus? What were you contacting them
Mhm.
about?
Sure. So it is really big. I think I mean it's almost 40 years. If you take it from the first Possessed record,
Hmm.
it'll be 40 years in 2025, I think. And obviously it's got roots that go back beyond that. It didn't just sort of like come into being one day. In fact, there's a fun story about the death growls being used in medieval music, or like a very early version of death growls, which is really fun. A
Cool.
fun little side story. Um, so I think there is a joke in there early on. So I went on Metal Archives,
Hmm.
and so the book's 40,000 words long, and I realized that there are 50. There are over 50,000 death metal bands recorded on Metal Archives. So if I just listed all the bands, I would have run out. Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting because you're telling the emotional story of death metal. You're saying like, A, why does it exist in the first place?
Hmm.
And B, what are the big kind of well, the not all the details in sort of granular detail, but what are the big things that happen that how do we nearly 40 years later, how do we have things like Venom Prison, how do we have
Yeah.
things like Cryptic Shift, how do we have uh Blood Incantation, how do we, and Gatecreeper, why do we have all these different strands of things that are very identifiably death metal happening at the same time 40 years on from that, and sort of telling the story of the struggles that led there. Yeah, that was the main sort of, and then sort of making that accessible to anyone who's sort of interested in that.
Yeah, because of course, you could be, I'd imagine, incredibly analytical about this, and almost be so dry, that it's hard to digest.
I think, yeah, I mean, the early drafts were, to be honest, like it had that's the thing people don't tell you about writing a book, is that it's like 10, 11, 12 drafts before you show it to an editor. And yeah, no, some of the early ones were really, really dense. It was like I'd sort of splurged all this information out, and it wasn't sort of readable. I imagine obviously, yeah, like I told my parents about this, and my parents are not death metal fans, but they are interested in music and interested in rock music history. I figured, like, I've got to write something like that something that they could read and understand. So I sort of like, I wanted it to be not a sort of big, dense academic thing. I wanted it to be something people can walk into Waterstones with a vague interest in, and then pick it up and then learn something that was going to like speak to them.
An interesting balance to try and get, because ultimately, you don't want to obviously write a fluff piece for someone who's a hardcore death metal fan, just reads it and goes, well, I've read all this and I heard all this before, and a cursory Wikipedia, all this information, / the obvious lack of density, so that someone who, as you said, just as a cursory interest, can pick it up and learn something little more. Did you struggle to get that balance as you went through the drafts? And at what point did you think, okay, this is coming together?
Yeah, so I think it was a struggle to sort of let it out, and obviously I'm a big part of the audience will be people who really care about death metal and want to and maybe have read a few of the other death metal books and want to learn a bit more. I think the big thing for me was because I do, obviously there are other books about death metal. This has been covered. If you want to learn about it, obviously you can go to Wikipedia, YouTube, that kind of thing, where people have sort of like outlined the sort of facts that built up the genre.
Yeah.
One of the big things, so obviously an early stage of that was like research, like me going back through things like Choosing Death and Swedish death metal, books like that, and sort of going through all the information, all the resources that are out there, both to sort of refresh myself and to sort of like get to grips with what the kind of the background information is out there at the moment. And one of the things in this book that I've sort of gone into a little bit with the help of a couple of more academic sources is the kind of philosophy that and the sort of thinking behind why it's been so popular. So I spoke to a very interesting person who's doing a PhD in metal studies, which I didn't know existed until I started this project, which has a sort of philosophy element about kind of the existential roots of death metal. You have death metals talking about death, is talking about sometimes quite often in quite extreme detail, people dying, people being tortured and ripped apart, and in whatever form it takes, this sort of the idea of death is something that kind of there's a lot of art about it because it's the only thing that's going to happen to all of us. So it's very interesting. So one of the things for me as to why death metal really it still exists now is that it still has this kind of this universality. It explains why sort of thrash metal sort of like comes up and down in popularity. Obviously there are a lot of bands that are still going, but death metal seems to have this a bit more longevity to it. I think that's what I'm sort of bringing to that kind of discussion, and that's what someone who's read a bunch of like facts about Bolt Thrower, that's what I'm bringing to that kind of discussion.
You kind of touched upon the immense amount of research you would have had to have done at the early stage of this. You mentioned at the very start that this was a lockdown project, so to speak. Do you think you would have been able to do the level of research you needed to do for this book had we not been in that situation?
It helps I'm a big nerd, and that like a lot of these books I just had and had read, and it was something I was really interested in. Um, yeah, I think obviously the lockdown did help because we weren't going out every weekend with the band. Um, I wasn't doing a bunch of other stuff that I usually do. Everything sort of ground to a halt. I think having that time and that space definitely did help.
But it would have happened nonetheless because you were passionate and
Mhm.
focused on this.
Yeah, I'm sure I would have made it work. I did. It was, but I mean, the other thing, like, it was. I say research like it's sort of work, but it was really good fun. To go back through everything. It was really really enjoyable. I love music history. I think well written music history. It's some of my favorite like things to read as a big books person. Yeah.
Well, with that in mind, then, because yeah, I mean, it's great to hear. Obviously, you could work out and presume that you had a passion and an interest and a love of this, but it's still good to hear you say it. Was there a particular point as you were researching, perhaps something that you didn't know that much about, be it a specific band or a time period that you found yourself enjoying more than anything else?
So one of the interesting things, so obviously I'm shooting myself in the foot as I said, is when you publish a book about music that's still ongoing, is still developing.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously you sort of cut yourself off to yeah, that's still going to continue and develop and everything. Um, Obviously that has implications for the book I'm about to put out, but it also the other sort of there are other books about death metal which kind of stop there's a few that are sort of published around the sort of early 2000s. And that's an interesting one because that's when death metal was kind of in a lull, like you sort of black metal sort of picks up and that's the big sort of controversy thing that everyone's very, very excited about. But also you have a lot of bands like you have a lot of bands breaking up. You have At the Gates breaking up. You have there's a big lull in like people getting very excited about it. Obviously, you have like bands like Nile coming out, and bands like Opeth are still doing really well. But what's interesting about that is they missed out on deathcore. Deathcore happens, sort of the mid 2000s, really picks up in like sort of 2007, 2008 as MySpace starts to develop. So and that was something I skipped over as a kid because I didn't really, as a kid, as a sort of like young teenager, it just didn't really connect with me at the time. I was more into sort of like drilling into the history of some of the other things. And yeah, actually, I found myself revisiting it, and going like, "Damn, this is actually really good." I don't know why I didn't like this at the time. um, and yeah, I spoke to quite a few deathcore bands about what it was like at the time, and that sort of thing. And there's a, a hidden history of deathcore,
Hmm.
which I think doesn't get featured in this kind of narrative as much. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing that. I really enjoyed sort of going back and like challenging my own prejudices there. And it is really, you speak to the people in Carcass and the people in Job for a Cowboy, and they are like they have the same motivations, like they're listening to the same music,
Yeah.
they're pushing for the same things, and they want to make the same kind of music. They're just obviously, um, they're kids who've grown up with more music because of the internet
Hmm.
and more ways to get out to people. And there are also people who've grown up. The big thing with Carcass and Napalm Death, people like that, is that they had to like their production engineers had to learn how to make that music at the same time that they were learning to make it. Whereas they've done all that work, they've laid the foundations, and people like Joffrey Cowboy they benefited from that. So it's really interesting to compare and contrast those kind of attitudes. So yeah, I really enjoyed writing that part of it.
Considering that and all these tangents that are always possible as you start to dive and go deep into specific areas, was it always easy to keep yourself focused on what your goal and what your aim was for this book?
I think because I tend to sort of go off on tangents and things.
Hmm.
And there were some like pretty long there were some things I had to cut for the final project. I think in the main once I'd sort of laid down the main part, the sort of emotional part of it, like the emotional story I wanted to tell, like
Yep.
why is this like why are these people trying to make this awful music, like this ugly, horrible music that my mum hates? Once I sort of like worked out how to tell that sort of story, I think then it was on the sort of subsequent edits, it was easier to sort of go like, okay, this needs to move here. This is like an interesting like subset, but isn't part of the main story.
Yep.
And just kind of like to keep that main story together. So yeah, that was a discipline I had to learn kind of on the fly. But I think we definitely got there, like as we as I went on.
You think you've learned quite a lot about being an author?
Yeah, I think so. I think about building a plot and about yeah, putting a book together in a way that's going to work for people. That's not just like a list of facts.
Overall, though, an enjoyable experience, enough so that it's essentially awoken something new. And you basically, do you think you'd continue to do this sort of work as you go forward?
Yeah, I hope so. I've pitched more. Pitched more stuff. Hoping to do some more. Hoping to branch out and do more kind of. I don't know if I do anything else in this series, but I definitely want to do more sort of music history. Yeah. I would recommend it to anyone.
Well, obviously, you must be a fan of death metal on all styles to even consider doing anything like this. It'd be quite hilarious if it was a music type that you hated. Certainly a different perspective. Does this interest have an origin story, and how has that evolved over the years?
Sure. So I remember being kind of a young teenager and coming across. So that would have been sort of around 2004, 2005. When I was sort of about sort of 13. I remember hearing death metal for the first time, and this was kind of in the age of the sort of like early 2000s indie wave, which at the time I didn't really get on with. I was looking for something a bit more kind of just yeah. It wasn't. I didn't know what I was looking for, but it wasn't that. And I came across death metal. I remember specifically people like saying like, why do you enjoy this?
Yeah.
And there's like, it's really ugly music, and we live in the age of not quite Spotify at that point, but like definitely YouTube and things, and music
Right.
is much easier to get hold of. You don't have to listen to the radio and take your favorite bits. I remember like that was the first point I was like, actually I don't have an answer for you, man. Like I'm 12, 13. I haven't really like thought that hard about it. But I couldn't like reasonably tell you why I like this kind of music and not the beautiful music that's readily available. I think it was that sort of I think that was actually the point that sort of led me into like thinking a little bit more about it, and then eventually wanting to write about it and to even to get started writing about it. And eventually go on and become a music journalist and to kind of communicate why it is that people sometimes want to listen to horrible music when perfectly nice, ordinary music is readily available.
With that in mind, then, someone comes along and decides, I want to listen to this horrible music. What is your advice for someone wanting to find their feet within the world of death metal? Because from an outside perspective, it's such a huge genre with so many different tangents that I'd imagine it's going to be quite daunting.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I think, and for me, it's all about history. I just really enjoy digging into that stuff. So I would say maybe start with Possessed, Death, Seven Churches, Scream Bloody Gore, that kind of thing. And from there, there's so much death metal, and there's so much death metal for every different vibe. You can have like very, very stupid or stuff where you need to have like a philosophy dictionary open next to you to sort of get what they're talking about. Like from the most sort of like from the densest like talent-free nonsense to some of the most like with Sugar, some of the most talented musicians in the whole world. And all the kind of the death black metal, the sinister stuff, the kind of crossover there. I think I would probably start there and then sort of see what sort of, if you enjoy it, see what sort of vibe you want to go from there. There's just so much out there.
There is, isn't there? There's so much out there, so many different variations, so many different styles, so many locations that define certain aspects of death metal. It is a fascinating subject. Lastly, on this part, then, Release date and availability. What are we looking at?
It is coming out on November 17th. It's coming out. It'll be really available. Waterstones and Blackwells and Amazon, anywhere that sells books. It will be, yeah, Waterstones will have it. I'm also we're doing a book launch in Bristol's Waterstones with Wallowing. Wallowing are going to come play in a bookshop. That's going to be good fun. I have to get my drum kit into Waterstones. I will we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so yeah, that's exciting. I don't think anyone's done that before. We're very excited to make that happen.
What day is that? Is that the day of the launch day, 17th?
It's 19th. That's happening this Saturday.
That is amazing. That sounds so much fun. That sounds so unique. So Waterstones with live music. Amazing. That's the book.
Mhm.
I wanted then to continue because of the time period. So a little bit of fun just to throw at you. We have been running throughout this period, 13 days of Halloween up until the 31st of October, a Halloween Q&A, throwing out many, many bands and artists.
Okay.
I'm going to throw some of these at you, a more condensed version just to tidy up this interview where we kind of focus on some of your more Halloween horror enjoyment. Excuse me. So first things first, what is your ideal or perfect Halloween night?
Oh, great. I mean, it's Saturday today. It's Saturday the 29th. That's a good question. I'm a big Halloween person. But I think I'm pretty like loose with it. I'm going out dancing tonight. I think like for me, it's all about dressing up. I never really grow out of dressing up. I think it's one of the things like heavy metal has a lot of dressing up. Death metal, not so much, interestingly, but there is a lot of adult dressing up in heavy metal culture in general. It's probably why I'm still so into it. So I think some kind of long, like very elaborate, if I'm completely honest, some kind of very elaborate sort of like dress up thing. And then like the actual event is secondary to it. It's all about like I want to see some very elaborate costumes that people have clearly spent several months working on. I think then like yeah, some kind of extravagant dancing event or a band or something. The actual event is secondary to the dressing up.
What's the most elaborate costume you've ever done?
It's a good question. I have like a witch outfit I do every year, and it's getting more and more elaborate. And I'm putting it together. Obviously, I'm doing that around moving house. I'm doing that again this year. I think you saw some version of that when we spoke at Bloodstock last year.
Fantastic. Of course, I do remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Then what, for example, right? So let's say you're not doing that and you're chilling at home and you want to put on a Halloween horror. What would you consider the perfect Halloween horror? Not necessarily your favorite movie or something like that, but the one that encapsulates the time period.
Sure. I think my favorite, we put up a band thing about this the other day. I don't want to be inconsistent, so I think illegally have to say The Exorcist. The Exorcist is just so good. And it does tie in with death metal because I think Necrophagia covered the Exorcist theme. It's an interesting sort of overlap with kind of music for horror films and music intended to be horrible and horrifying, and heavy metal people going, okay, if we're going to do this, then we've got to like our sources are kind of limited. We've got to look beyond what other metal bands have done. So that's a fun death metal tangent. Yeah, I think probably The Exorcist. It's just a great mood piece. It's also super gross. So yeah, which are the two building blocks of Halloween. I also really love. I watched Midsummer over lockdown. I think. I just thought that was wonderful. So that would be on my like Halloween playlist.
I'm going to guess that answers another question I had, which was about modern horror and perhaps some of your favorite, because people tend to focus more on the classics. So I always like to get an idea of what's interesting you in the modern times. So would you say Midsummer is your kind of favorite, best modern horror you've seen in some time?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not super up to date on horror films. I did watch Hereditary is the other. I think same director. Also very good. I did watch I think beginning of this year or last year. I can't remember when it came out, but Midnight Mass, the TV show, I thought that was really, really good. So yeah, I don't know if it's I don't know if anyone wants to come and watch all of Midnight Mass in one go with me, but that would be a pretty good. That would be a really pretty good Halloween, I think.
Amazing. What's your earliest memory then of seeing a horror movie? I'm always interested to know how early in people's childhoods this sort of thing comes about.
Horror movies, I'm not really sure. My parents weren't. I was the eldest of three, um, and my parents just are not into that kind of thing at all. So I'm trying to think when I would have come across it. Um,
Well, how about twist that then? Because as a youngster, things can be frightening that aren't
yeah.
necessarily horror. Can you think of anything that comes to mind like that that perhaps freaked you out or scared you at a young age?
Yeah, I remember Tim, Tim, the guitarist from Sale, and I had a big argument about this the other day because he maintained they weren't scary at all. But I remember being like, I remember the Goosebumps books being like, yeah. Like I remember that. That probably ages me a whole bunch. I feel very 30 years old right now, but yeah, I remember the Goosebumps books. Like I remember having to like work myself up to them as a kid. That was before I got into death metal. I'm desensitized to everything. Maybe it's Goosebumps that started me off on this whole journey.
Very likely. I mean, I think
Yeah,
if from a
yeah.
certain age, Goosebumps, R.L.
Hmm.
Stein's Goosebumps has an imprint upon your mind. I mean, I'm older than you,
Hmm.
but Goosebumps was still part of my youth as well because they were written and published in the mid '90s,
Hmm. Yeah.
'90s and stuff. In fact, for the last 2 years, we've been running a series on the YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel every Tuesday, we review the episodes of the Goosebumps TV show.
Oh
So that to
wow.
kind of refresh, and you forget that some of that stuff was quite frightening for a certain age.
Hmm.
Hmm.
There is some really gross stuff. I remember there was one. I mean, there's some about the dummy that can talk and does awful things. But there was one about something. I can't remember the plot, but someone could turn their skin inside out or turn their whole body inside out. And I remember the description of that being like as a kid's like, this is a bit much. That was pretty cool. That one really sticks out for me. Like that description. Yeah, it really sticks out. I also R.L. Stein, I'm pretty sure it was just one person and it wasn't like a cabal of people writing together. But it does prove that, you can I try and write quite a lot. I try and write a little bit every day. Um because I know it can be done. People like that just published a staggering amount of material and wrote a staggering amount of material. Um, and I always thought that was a really good if you are going to be a writer, a good sort of habit to get into. People like Terry Pratchett the same, and they just wrote a staggering amount of stuff. I really appreciate that work ethic and his commitment to making me a tiny child very scared.
Amazing, but also something you've taken into later years as well. How about this then?
Okay.
In real life, have
Okay.
you ever experienced something unusual or unexplainable?
Oh, unexplainable. Oh man, I wish I could say yes. My dad's got a ghost story, and he's the most like straight down the middle person, like not into that kind of thing at all. Um, Apart from that one ghost story, the when he saw like a headless horseman on a carriage in a motorway. Um,
Amazing.
yeah, I like always was like, oh man, I never see stuff like that. I do all kinds of nighttime driving. I never see any cool ghost stuff. Um, I am interested that I'm a very anxious person. I'm also very afraid of spiders, and the spider fear is definitely different to the like have to make a stressful phone call fear. And that always feels like there's always a moment where I like have those feelings. It's like, this is different this is a different subgenre of fear to the like I have seen a spider fear.
What's a horror cliche that you just can't stand?
Um, Probably like violent misogyny, that kind of thing. It's quite unfortunate. It shows up as a trope. I mean, I'm not super well versed in horror films, really. Anyone who knows me famously like not seen a whole bunch of them. But particularly in sort of death metal, the early Cannibal Corpse, that kind of thing. It's really awful stuff against women. And really, when you look at it now, it's just a very sort of obviously kind of awful thing. And yeah, bringing it back to death metal. An interesting thing is you have bands now like Venom Prison who are reacting against that kind of thing.
Yep.
You have tracks like Perpetrator Emasculation, which imagines the castration of a rapist. So taking the same kind of body horror, violence, yeah, of the early death metal, completely turning it on its head and reimagining that as something that kind of reimagines that kind of those ugly impulses in death metal as something more positive, more certainly sort of like goes for the throat with that kind of thing.
It's important as well. Like, it starts to change perceptions, starts to change the belief. There's nothing more depressing these days than perhaps finding an older band, say in the death metal genre and so on, that kind of thing. And of course, you may not be able to hear or understand the lyrics, so you go out of your way to then find some lyrics, and then you read those lyrics and you think, ah, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a Fast and Furious
Okay.
section where it's a would you rather.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask these, but I'm also going to tell you what film it relates to, just in case you don't know.
Okay.
So try and picture yourself in the exact scenario. Take it seriously.
Okay.
Basically, would you rather spend a night in 112 Ocean Avenue, aka the Amityville house,
Okay,
or Hill House, the one that was featured in The Haunting and most recently The Haunting of Hill House?
I haven't seen either of those, so I think probably the second one, because I'm keen to spend some time in a haunted house. That sounds great.
I've been waiting. You will be the last person that does this Q&A because all the others have been finished and completed. And I've been waiting to see if anybody would write 112 Ocean Avenue, the Amityville house, but nobody does because everybody says the same thing. There's demons in that house. The other one just has ghosts.
Okay.
Which one is easier to deal with?
I'd ghosts, I think.
You would hope.
Yes. Yeah.
Would you rather play a game, aka Saw, or be shown such sights, aka Hellraiser? So which would you rather deal with?
Oh my God. I think like, you know what? Let's go see such sights. See such sights. I think there'll be a little bit of pleasure in there. And with Saw, I think I just have to. It'd be some gross eyeball stuff that I couldn't deal with. It would be that specific. It'll be whatever it is. It would be like not only disgusting, but like very specifically unpleasant to me as well. So yeah, let's see such sights. Let's get a bit of pleasure in while we're suffering for eternity.
Fantastic. Okay, you come home and somebody's bought you a nice little gift.
Okay.
The doll. What would you rather it be? Would you want it to be a good guy doll, aka Chucky, or Annabelle, the doll from the Conjuring / Annabelle movies?
I'm gonna upset. So Tim doesn't like Chucky again, so I'm just gonna, out of spite, I'm gonna say Chucky. Let's do it.
And this one is about where you'd rather be stuck. So you have a choice. You could be stuck in Burkittsville, Maryland, the woods, aka Blair Witch, or stuck in the caves of the I can never say this one. The mountains from The Descent.
Okay.
Appalachian Mountains. There it is.
So haven't seen have seen Blair Witch, haven't seen The Descent. I've always kind of wanted to go to the Appalachian Mountains, and if I go there and I die, then at least I've ticked something off the bucket list. Whereas the woods in Blair Witch just seems kind of woodsy. I am fond of the woods, but like let's go mountains.
Yeah, at least you're gonna get to see something and do something new.
Yeah.
And last but not least, this is about you.
Okay.
What character do you think you would be in a traditional slasher movie? So, for example, would you be the nerd, the jock, the cheerleader, the final girl, the villain, and so on?
Cool. I have just talked about death metal pretty much without taking a breath for 35 minutes. So I think legally I have to say nerd. I think in a different life probably cheerleader, but I think we all know what's happening here.
Yeah, kind of walked into that one really. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Real good fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please help us out by giving us a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button. If you really liked what you saw, consider donating to keep the website and channel running by buying us a coffee via our coffee page or picking up some merch. from our Big Cartel store. You can check us out on gbhbl.com as well as via our social media, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, as well as listen to our interviews via SoundCloud, Apple Music and Spotify. Just search for GBHBL. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?